WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Was a big Saturday night down on Route 1 in College Park. Luke Jones and I commiserating right now over all things Maryland. You know, Luke, I'm going to say this out loud, and I've been saying this for the better part of 20 years, back in the ACC tournament when little Dookie would cry because his team didn't win the tournament and all that other stuff. I just can't get worked up about a February basketball game, even a big game against a rival, the Duke of the Big Ten at home, and let's unfurl the flag and let's wrinkle our Washington Post and yell, "You suck," and do all that stuff, and then go out and lose by 20 points. But all things aside, I'm not all that steamed about Saturday night. More than anything, and I probably will speak to this out loud this week, I was kind of heartened that people cared about Maryland on a Saturday night for a change. You know what I mean? Like, it's the first time in a long, long, long time that they've had a $200 get-in down there for a game, and a regular season game. And the fact that people have their feelings hurt this week, okay, well, it means you cared enough to watch on Saturday night. And Maryland played a big, big, big game. They lost it. They didn't look good. They'll have more opportunities this week against Michigan, next week against whomever they put in front of them in Indianapolis, and then whatever the dance card says for a week or two, or if you get lucky, 3, right? I'm way more worried about that than what happened on Saturday night. But I thought Saturday night's kind of telling, and the holes in the program and the depth and just sort of the jitters of the ESPN bus showing up and all that. I mean, they look like crap on Saturday night, but I'm not going to hang them for it, man.
Yeah, and I think that's the proper attitude to have. I mean, this is a team that's still first place in the Big Ten. They're going to win the Big Ten, barring a collapse here over the final week. But you're seeing some cracks here that you're a little concerned, and I don't want to go as far as to say, here we go again with a late season fade, because they had won so many games before losing 2 of the last 3. But you do kind of look at it and say it took a huge effort to win at Michigan State, which, look, that was a great win for the program, especially considering how little they've done on the road in the Mark Turgeon era. You know, they take care of business against Northwestern and Nebraska. I mean, 2 kind of bottom feeders in this conference. Didn't necessarily look great. But then they lost at Ohio State. We saw how that game played out. They needed a Darryl Morsell 3 to win at Minnesota, or that would have been a loss, and certainly another game in which they trailed the entire way. And then to have the atmosphere that they had Saturday night against Michigan State. I mean, College Game Day was there for the first time in, I think it was 15 years. I think it had been in 2005, the last time Game Day had come to College Park for a Maryland basketball game, and the crowd was really greased up, and it was loud, and they fall behind 9-0 right out of the chute, and they tied it at 23, and you're thinking, okay, they've come back, they're fine, and then they have one of their scoring droughts that lasts 7 minutes. So it was definitely disappointing in terms of a missed opportunity to clinch at least a tie for first place in the Big Ten. Certainly a missed opportunity when you look at some of the other teams that lost over the weekend in terms of the top 10. They're still in really good position, and I think it's important to stress that. But now you do look at these final 2 games and want to say, okay, what happens at Rutgers? I mean, that's a pretty good basketball team. That's a tough place to play. How do they fare there? Do they get back on the horse, and these 2 out of 3 losses are a thing of the past, and then you're looking ahead to the tournament? Or do you lose another one, and then people are really starting to doubt you again? So I don't think it's time to panic. I think this team is still a really good basketball team, but certainly when you consider the opportunity that they had afforded to them on Saturday night, and the atmosphere and the electricity, and just the juice that you're seeing for Maryland basketball for the first time in frankly, a really long time, to have that kind of performance, it's definitely disappointing. But at the same time, this is a Michigan State program that was number 1 at one point earlier in the season, and I think still has a lot of talent, really well coached, really good basketball players, and they were the better team, and they deserved to win on Saturday night, and that was apparent in the fact that they led basically coast to coast.
Well, I mean, the pedigree of Michigan State was obvious at the beginning of the year, right? I mean, the fact that they stumbled in January and didn't play well, we knew this was an existential threat, right? There was a reason the ESPN game bus was showing up and kids were hammered down there at 10 o'clock in the morning on a 30-degree day, right? It really did feel like they sort of left it in the parking lot, though, right? I mean, the whole thing of falling behind. I looked up; it was 14-2. I was over at Howard Scher's birthday party at a non-sponsor location in Timonium, and the whole bar was Maryland up. I mean, it was my friend's birthday. There was some festival going on at this bar, but everybody stopped. People were stopping me on the way in, talking Maryland all the way through the bar. It was that kind of a night. I mean, I didn't wish I were there because I didn't want to deal with the traffic, but and I was at my friend's birthday bash, but it was a Saturday night where everybody that likes sports in our area was a little glued to it. And I'm trying to use that and accentuate the Baltimore positive part of that because, look, Maryland football does not matter. Maryland basketball sort of matters to the 10 people it matters to, but as far as them growing their base and finding people who are Maryland fans who don't remember Buck Williams, I don't meet a whole lot of those. I don't meet bandwagon Maryland fans the way I've met bandwagon Capitals fans or Nationals fans or even Lamar fans, in the last 6 months, that people that you've never seen at the stadium start showing up. Maryland needs that sort of a boost. And I don't know whether a Final Four, a national championship, a Sweet 16, whatever. I know they need to create interest in February in order for the trains to stop in March. And at least for a night, they did that. And I think it's very, very unfortunate that they laid such a smelly turd in front of the whole world on Saturday. But it's not like the smelly turd that the Ravens laid where the season's over the next day against the Titans. You dust off, you go play a tournament, you get your seed, even if it's a 3 seed, right? I mean, even if they should fall next week or whatever, the game you need to worry about is the one that's on the calendar St. Patrick's Day week, right? That's where it's at, and win 3 or 4 of those, and you start to make headway.
Right. I mean, and that's really what it comes down to, and that's why I'm glad you brought up the Ravens because that was one of the points I was going to make. As much as this team looked good, winning 9 in a row, and I think the Ravens, even though it's apples to oranges because it's a different sport, but I think that's a reminder that having that long winning streak and, quote, momentum going into the postseason can be an overrated thing sometimes. I mean, certainly you don't want to be playing poorly when you're going in. That's why I think you do look at these last 2 games, going on the road at Rutgers and finishing up the regular season at home against Michigan State on Sunday. You want to finish well. You want to put the memory of these 2 losses in their last 3 behind them, but it does come down to March, and it comes down to a lesser degree the Big Ten tournament. I mean, I don't know what winning the Big Ten tournament would feel like for Maryland relative to 2004 or other ACC tournaments that Maryland won over the course of their history, but I think it really comes down to what happens in the field of 68. I mean, that's what anyone cares about. I mean, people forget all the time the 2002 Terps that won it all, they lost in the semifinals of the ACC tournament. I mean, that's, it wasn't a big deal. Why? Because they won it all and they cut down the nets in Atlanta. So that's what it really comes down to. So, again, I'm really intrigued to see how Mark Turgeon has these guys ready to play against Rutgers. I mean, a really emotional Saturday night late game, and then to turn around and play on the road on Tuesday. Now, it's a short trip. I mean, you're only going to Jersey, so it's not as though you have a long trip, but how do they turn around? How do they respond to just the emotional letdown? Because, I mean, that was an absolute electric atmosphere. You could tell in the opening minutes of the game, but to play the way they did, and look, I mean, it's not as though they were completely run out of the gym by 25 or 30 points.
Well, they got back in the game, and then that kid sunk that half-court shot, and it was like, ugh, right?
Well, it's like I said, I mean, they tied it at 23, and you're thinking, okay, game reset. They're fine. They weathered the storm of the first 10 minutes that weren't very pretty, and Michigan State just shot the lights out of the ball, and then they couldn't score for 7 minutes, and then in the second half, they cut it to 9 at one point, but they really didn't challenge in the second half, and I think that's what was disappointing. But again, how do they respond to this? I think that's what's important, because if you go to Rutgers and you sleepwalk through that one, and believe me, that Rutgers team is more than capable of beating this Maryland team. I mean, it's a tough place to play, one of the toughest places to play in the Big Ten, despite it being Rutgers and not really thinking of them as being a cachet kind of a prestigious program. But if you lose that one, then you start to pick all of this apart and say, well, you had that scare against Nebraska, and you needed the Darryl Morcell 3 to win at Minnesota. This thing is a couple plays away from really being a late season collapse. But if you win on Tuesday and then you take a deep breath and you have a few days off before you finish up the regular season and you got that win under your belt and the memory of these two losses is a little more minimized. But, just going back to the game, as much as you look at it and say, well, Michigan State played better, I mean, that's stating the obvious, but they did such a good job defending Cowan. Jalen Smith was very good, but at times it's just like, why aren't you getting him the ball more frequently? He had 10 shots in that game, finished with 20 points. I'd like to see him get a few more touches. But we've talked about this a lot. When you look at Wiggins, you look at Ayala, and I'll throw Morcell and Dante Scott played pretty well in the game, despite the fact that he had 4 fouls, and that was a factor. But who was their third option? Because Cowan didn't give you a great performance. Jalen Smith was really good, but again, would have liked to have seen him touch the ball even more than he did. But they got nothing from Eric Ayala, 3 points, 0 for 4, 0 for 3 from three-point land, and Wiggins was 1 of 7 from the field. So that's where we talk about the lack of depth, and you need something more from one of those two guys, especially when you consider the way that Michigan State was able to defend.
Well, there are 5 more guys on the bench there, right? So,
yeah.
And for whatever reason, Turgeon just won't use those guys. And, we just assume the kids down the bench that we don't even know their names, that they can't play, or that Turgeon doesn't want them to play because he's not 8, 9, 10 deep. I mean, you even saw Izzo bring guys in at the end. A guy named Marble and Brown, and these guys get 3-5 minutes, get him in there and run him around a little bit. Turgeon doesn't have that confidence, and every night you look up and look, you go back to Trimble, you go back to all the guys in Turgeon, 38, 39 minutes almost all the time for 2, if not 3 guys, especially in bigger games. Turgeon just doesn't trust his bench. He's not that guy, right?
Well, they just, who do you trust? Ricky Lindo gives them some decent minutes from time to time. Wiggins is the big one. Wiggins is essentially the 6th starter, and a lot of times he plays more minutes than some of the starters on the floor. But, we've seen Hakeem Hart get a little more run here of late. They were talking him up big time during the telecast. He hit a 3 at one point that felt like it could be a little bit of a momentum boost, but you're right. They have one guy off the bench that you can count on game in and game out is going to play a lot, and it's Wiggins, and Aaron Wiggins shot the ball poorly, which 4 points. He's someone that's been giving them some big performances. So in a game like they played Saturday night, where you're playing one of the best inside-out combinations in the country. People talk about Cowan and Jalen Smith, but Cassius Winston and Xavier Tillman. That's a really potent duo. And then when you look at what they got from Malik Hall, who's not a guy that usually scores much, but certainly did on Saturday, and I thought Rocket Watts did a nice job for them defensively, and he put in 13 points. So you look at what they got from their guys across the board. Not that Michigan State plays their bench a ton, but they got some big shots. Even Aaron's hit a couple 3-pointers for them off the bench. So
when they shoot the ball like that, you're going to have to be exemplary. You're going to have to be better than one of 11 on the bottom of your roster.
Right. And that's the thing. Maryland did not play well. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to forgive that. They played a very underwhelming game on Saturday night. Michigan State played really, really well. They shot the ball. They were just under 48%. They hit 43% from beyond the arc, and they made their free throws. Maryland did not shoot the ball particularly well. They did not defend well, which I think that's kind of a low-key concern. If you want to look at anything over the last 4 to 5 games, is defense, which has been Maryland's calling card. They give up 78 points on Saturday. That's not a stellar defensive effort there for the college game. So that's where you kind of just look at it and, Maryland they didn't play very well, and Michigan State played extremely well, and that's going to add up to even playing at home. that's going to add up to losing by double digits, and that's where Maryland found themselves, trailing by double digits for a large chunk of this one and pretty much the whole second half. Like I said, they cut it to 9, and every time Maryland might reel off 2 unanswered baskets, and you think, okay, is this when they make their run? Michigan State always had an answer. So you give them a lot of credit, and like I said, I'm not ready to panic yet by any means, and I think this team's done enough this season to deserve a vote of confidence, but I'm really fascinated to see how they're going to respond going on the road at Rutgers on Tuesday night, because I just think that's the kind of game that will be a litmus test to say whether this 3-game stretch, 2 losses in 3 games, is just a late-season hiccup, and then they're going to right the ship and be fine, and then we'll see what happens the rest of the way in March. Or if they lose Tuesday night, now you're talking 3 losses out of 4 and a miracle Morcell shot to save you from a 4th straight loss. Then you're starting to wonder, is the late season hype getting to them? Is the lack of depth getting to them? Are they starting to fatigue a little bit? And defense being one of those areas that tends to go when you get a little more tired. So I think Tuesday, I'm not going to say it's must win, because that's kind of silly to say that about a top 10 team, but I think this is an important one for kind of just a mental wellness check for them as much as anything else, to just say, okay, they lost a couple games. It's a really terrific conference, but you don't want to be in a position where you're losing 3 out of 4 going into the regular season finale, because we know we're getting very close to that time where one bad day and then you're done.
Well, I start to wonder this tournament again next week, and this is, I'm 51 years old. It's the 45th straight year since David Thompson that I've wondered the validity of these tournaments and playing them other than just gathering people and taking money from them and having everybody, have a feel-good out in Indianapolis next week. But I'm not one that thinks they need to go out there and sweat and play and go triple overtime and do everything they can do to arrange a 2 seed. I know there's a reason you would want the 1 seed more than the 2 seed. I sort of get that, and the home cooking of, let's say, Greensboro and Madison Square Garden or some preferred trip. But we're starting to stumble down the line on that now, aren't we? Right? I mean, the win on Saturday night, that would have put you back way into that conversation. The loss kind of feels like you better go win the tournament next weekend if you think you're a 1 seed. You better win out now. And I think that's a lot to ask this team to do over the next 2 weeks to get a 1 seed and then have the pressure of being a 1 seed.
Well, I mean, but if you're going to be a 1 seed, that's the kind of thing you do, right? I mean, unless you've put together a regular season where you only have 2 or 3 losses, which, Maryland's at 6 now. You're not going to be a number 1 seed unless you go on a major run.
That's 50% more than it was last week.
Yeah. So, it's definitely it's not looking nearly as encouraging as it did, say, going to the Ohio State game, because, I remember Joe Lunardi said, this was a week ago Sunday, that if Maryland had won that game, he would have had them on their 1 line. So I think, look, do you have to have a number 1 seed to win the national championship or get to the Final Four? Of course not. We've seen so many great stories, even teams that were Cinderella-type teams. But, again, as much as anything, you want to be putting yourself in a position where you feel good about yourself, you're healthy. I do think it is, it's always that great debate as far as how much the conference tournament really means for a team that's an at-large that would already be in a total lock, and that's, of course, that's Maryland right now. So how much of it is, do you want to just improve your seeding? Which, I think even with these couple losses, it's not as though Maryland's dropping to a 5 or a 5 seed or something like that. They're not, they've got a really good resume in that regard. But you do want to be in a position where you're not doubting yourself and you're not thinking, here we go again. And that applies, that applies for Turgeon. That applies for some of the upperclassmen on this team, even though there aren't that many. This is a young team, so maybe that helps them in that regard. But you want to finish the season on a high note, and like I said, get the win at Rutgers and take care of Michigan. And what happens in the Big Ten tournament happens. I already said it earlier in our conversation. I don't know what kind of juice there is other than, hey, it's great, you win the Big Ten. I mean, that's fun.
Yeah, but I mean, do you really want them playing 3 games in 3 nights under those conditions? I every year, especially when they're good. I mean, look, when you're the 8th team in the conference and you feel like you can go in there and get to the final to get yourself a bid because you're on the bubble and you're 18 and 11 or whatever, I'll hear that. But I hate these tournaments, and I never sort of get the value in them because they don't matter. In the same way that what happens Saturday night doesn't really matter when you're 23-5 going into it. Therefore, I can't sit here and want to fire Turgeon or bench Cowan or coach up Sticks or what. I mean, it was a tough loss at home. The only games that matter begin in 3 weeks, and I'm not even all that concerned about where they get seeded.
Yeah, I mean, and ultimately, I mean, you can talk about the seed, and you know, of course you want a high seed. I mean, that's the Mr. or Captain Obvious statement, but it comes down to your draw. I mean, we've all seen, I mean, even the first round matchups. I mean, UMBC, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but it comes down to matchups and what your draws are, and are you facing that mid-major team that just is a tricky matchup for you, or they do some things offensively that you just don't see a whole lot, or that team that is just going to shoot the lights out for 40 minutes. I mean, we've seen that over and over and over again. So I hear what you're saying. I mean, you don't want to be completely limping into this thing because, again, I do think confidence has value. I think momentum is overblown, but I don't think it's non-existent. So right the ship here and see what happens in the Big Ten tournament. I mean, you don't want to bow out in your first game and look real lethargic and lackluster and uninspired, but at the same time, you don't need to win it, to your point. So at this point, it's going to be tough for them to get a number 1 seed. So if they're not really in that conversation, which, again, we'll see what happens because this has been a crazy college basketball season, and every time you feel like you get some answers, the questions change, right? I mean, that's just the way this season has been, top to bottom. But you know, just get out there and slow the heart rate a little bit and take care of these last couple and
dust
see
off.
What happens. Right, see what happens, and then you know you get to the field of 68 and you see what your draw is, and then at that point it is now or never. But again, you kind of look at this thing. The depth thing, that's not a new development, but as you're getting later into the season, I mean, they've played 18 conference games now. I mean, this 20-game Big Ten is pretty crazy in that regard. But, you know, is fatigue starting to set in a little bit when you have 6 guys? And, again, on Saturday night, they just, you know, Jalen Smith, and they didn't get a whole lot from anyone else. I mean, they got a couple okay performances from others, but you got to do more than that, especially when you're going up against a Michigan State team that was on top of its game.
Want to give a shout-out to a bunch of our sponsors here as we begin another fantastic week. A lot of Baltimore positive happening later on in the week. Sheila Dixon, mayor candidate, former mayor. We're going to have some tough questions for her down at Fadley's on Thursday. She is running. We offer equal time here. Also, Frank Kelly joining us on Thursday down for Baltimore Positive and Crab Cakes at Fadley's. Ted Venetoulis is our guest this week, as well as Malia Cromer on talking about Kerwin and education and polling and where we are, where the temperature is for the local citizenry here, getting up on April 28th and the primary election. All the mayor candidates out at Baltimore Positive. I want to give a shout out to Bill Cole for inspiring me to reach a little further in the community and charity series. All of our friends at Gordian Energy and our Accelerant partners up there for saying hello last week. Big shout out to Bill Cole there. Royal Farm, let's go around here because I've got a brand new Maryland magma lamp from Sporticulture that I'm featuring out here. It has gold magma, kind of like the Terps shoes on Saturday night, although it's not Dayglow green like those hideous pajamas that Sparty was wearing. But I do have this at Sporticulture. Check out Sporticulture. You can order one like this. You can order planters like my Ravens planter that everybody thought was a cannabis plant with my 49ers and Kansas City Chiefs planters at Super Bowl week. Pizza John's, we got out there the other day. Pete and I had a business meeting at Pizza John's. Mine included a cheesesteak with provolone. It was delicious. I want to give them a shout out. And the cool Maryland logo Pizza John's hat. I'm going to wear this a little bit this week, too. But I always have the cup on the set because I always have my Liberty Pure water in the Pizza John's cup. Royal Farms coffee, always brewed fresh. The Kona blend. Had some fried chicken. I did get some Western fries last week for the Maryland game last week. The Minnesota game. I was eating Western fries and ketchup because that's the way I like it. You know they have gravy at Royal Farms. You can do Western fries and gravy. I had never done that combination before last week. They gave it to me in a little plastic container. I said, thank you very much. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Gas up there as well. By the way, I haven't shouted at Sydney Newson off in a week or two. Charles Newsonoff and Sons in Parkville. Go see Sydney. My wife did. Her ring broke, and Sydney put it back together again. And now her ring looks beautiful. Go check them out. Just outside the Beltway, $6.95. You can honk the horn from Perring Parkway and say hello to Sid. Also, our friends at Full Circle Tire and Auto up in Bel Air. Full auto repair and maintenance. They take care of anybody's car in Harford County. You need somebody you can trust up there. That's who you're looking for. We've been telling you about it for years. Tires, more tires. 38 brands in stock, and they love that oil change there. Get you in, get you out. 2133 North Fountain Green Road in Bel Air. Looking forward to get back up to Bel Air. Big shout out to everybody up there at Buffalo Wild Wings and my pal Lee Tessier. I was up there last week as well. Much love for Harford County. We'll be coming back to Adams Jeep sometime soon with we have a really cool series we're putting together for the spring. I'm not going to blow it. It's not Baltimore positive. It's purple in nature. I am Nestor. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports and stuff.